All right, so if you guys were here last week, Bob talked about, he introduced us to Adam and Eve, and he had some of us up here, laying on the floor and eating forbidden fruit and doing all kinds of crazy stuff over here. Yeah, it was fun. We're not gonna do that again. But while I was up here, Lisa was up here, and Bob had us doing all that, I was kind of like starting to kind of preach to myself a different sort of message. And so I want to share that today. And so yeah, Bob kind of explained or introduced us, Adam and Eve, in the garden, and basically, it was all good until it wasn't. And he then we had Friday we had a Bible study in the park. So he was talking about how nothing separates us from God, and there was all kinds of scriptures. And again, I was like, kind of standing over there, like preaching another message the same message to myself, in my head. And so I want, I'm going to share that with you, but we're going to go back to the garden. So, and this whole theme of, God and his love. And I got that song in my head right now, but you just sang it, and that's great. But I want to talk about the big S word. The big S word. The big S word that separates us from God. Okay, so what would that word be? What do you guys think that word is? Sin? All right. It's nothing. All right. Sin. No. Okay. So hear me out. Yeah. Okay. So a 4-letter word that has the a 5-letter word. We'll put SH together. Okay. Shame. I want to talk about shame. And I would say that's a 5-letter S word that too often does separate us from the love of God. And I want to explain like how that works. So I want to talk about shame. Shame is something we talk a lot about in treatment. And it's because it's like the core of addiction. And so if you're here, with an addiction or in recovery, you understand what I'm saying. And if you're here and you're not in recovery, you've never had those struggles, you still know what shame is. I believe everybody in here knows what shame is, and that's just how it is. And so we all have that in common. What's that? Shame. I don't know what she's doing. So I'm pretty sure we've all struggled with shame. So before we get into that, though, I think it's important for us to identify what we're talking about when we're talking about shame, because sometimes shame and guilt can be interchangeable. We use it all the time, interchangeable. But I think that shame and guilt are different. And you were to sit through one of my IOP classes or a group, I would explain like how guilt and shame are different. But just for now, I want to just so this is it. Like shame, what do you guys think the difference between shame and guilt are? Anybody know? No. Okay. All right, so yeah, shame says, guilt says I messed up. I messed up, I made a mistake, something went wrong, and I did it. And shame can actually be healthy, and it can be helpful. And guilt. Yeah. Some would argue that shame can be as well, but guilt can be helpful, and that's kind of where the conviction, God does convict us, and that's a great thing. But Guilt says I messed up. Shame says I am messed up. Guilt says I did something stupid. Shame says I am stupid. And so there's a psychiatrist, and author, John Bradshaw, and we kind of go through his books like in treatment as well. And he says that shame is demonic. And so if you struggle with that idea, or like with demonic or devils and demons and that kind of thing, he actually explains it like this. He says demonic is the way he says it in this way. He says something that is demonic has the potential to encompass our whole personality. Instead of momentary feeling of being limited, making mistakes, littleness, or being less attractive or talented than someone else. He says demonic is when a person comes to believe that his whole self is fundamentally flawed and defective. And so that's how he defines demonic. I think that's right. Brene Brown, if you guys know who she is, she says, shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging, something we've experienced, done, or failed to do makes us unworthy of connection. And so these are just some working definitions of shame. So we see what Brene Brown says and what John Bradshaw says, but what does the Bible say? So you really don't have to read very far in the Bible before we realize, before the problem hits us, right? So when you watch a movie, like you have a movie, you have the, it's introduced to you, you got the setting, you got the, the setting, you got it, and then you got a problem, right? And then right off the bat, somewhere you're gonna find the problem, and then you're gonna find the solution somewhere, right? And so right there in the very first few pages of the Bible, please open up your Bible and turn to page 1. And it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form, void, darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light, it was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, first day. So what I want us to look at, because I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but at the end of each one of these little stanzas, this is kind of like a poem, we see God saw that it was good, and God saw that it was good, right? So he creates this garden, he creates this universe, he creates everything that we see, and he says it is good. And then he creates the animals, and he creates the birds for the air, and the fish in the sea, and he says it is good. And he says that it is good, and he says that it is good. And then when you come to verse 27, it says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish and the sea and the birds of the air and the heavens and the earth and everything that he created, right? And then it says, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in it, fruit, and shall have them for food, and every beast in the earth, and every bird in the heaven, and to everything creeping on the earth, everything that has breath breath of life. I have given every green plant for your food, and it was so, and God saw everything he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day, right? And then the seventh day and God rested. And so it is good and it is good and it is good. And God creates man and he said, and it says, it is very good, right? So he looks at everything he created after he creates man and puts them in this blessed world and says it is very good. And so I think it's important when we get back into the garden, when we get back into the story, that we look at it as a story. You know, kind of the same way we see other stories with talking animals and stuff. And I think when we do that, you know, it's not minimizing the scripture, because I know we've used this to like kind of combat evolution and, you know, the atheist neighbor and all that kind of thing. And we've also used these scriptures to shame other people, you know, let them know like how, you know, they're sinful and the Bible says so. And we've used these scriptures, and I think we're actually seeing the opposite in this story. Then shame, but yet we use it to shame, or I have, you know, it's the way I was raised, maybe the way you were raised, but I think when we see it as a story, we recognize that we can place ourselves in that. And just like Bob was talking about the rocks, you know, that's a metaphor, and like I like that kind of stuff. You know, I like to look at these metaphors and what does that represent? You know, when we look at this as a story, we see that kind of thing. We can be like, okay, what is that? What does that represent? Like, what's behind that element in the story? So anyway, I'm gonna get back to my notes. So last week, Bob painted this picture. There's a beautiful picture of a man and a woman. They're living in the garden, and they're living in the creation. To work with God, to rule with God, right? And create culture and have kids and rule and live life, right? In the world that he's created. And God said, look at all this. Like, look at all this. This is all yours, right? And he says, everything you see, yours. But you see that over there, he says, that'll harm you, right? That'll harm you. It's not like he was saying, you know, anyway, I'm not going to get into that. So it's not like he was tempting them with evil, like you know, we see. He was saying that that's harmful. And God warns us of what's harmful for us, because he doesn't want to see us hurt. He doesn't want to see us, you know, he knows better than we do, and doesn't want to see us, you know, hurt in those ways. And so, okay, and then, so he says not to eat that, you know, don't eat that. The tree is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? I've heard it said that a better translation would be good and bad. So I guess tov and ra, but so I want to look at it like that. So Adam and his wife were both. Oh, sorry. Let's look at Genesis 2, because that's all Genesis 2. Bob kind of went over Genesis 2 yesterday. There's so much here, and I just don't want to have to like repeat everything that we talked about last week. But if we go down to the very end of Genesis 2 to 25, so the very last sentence there, it says, and the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. So when we look at this as a story, and we're looking at these metaphors, what do you think that means? So they were naked, right? Yeah, and they were shameless. And the what is it? The NIV says they felt no shame. So, but naked seems to be like something that carries with it a lot of negative connotations. You know, if you think about it, right? Like, I mean, it seems to be different saying here. Okay, so let's think about this. think about all of the pressures we feel on a daily basis. We hear you need to be a certain way, you need to act a certain way, you need to have a certain thing, you need to be this way to prove your worth or your value, right? If we don't have these things, we're considered less than, right? Okay, yeah. Imagine what, like what if we could live in that world? Like what if we could live in that world that we didn't feel less than? We didn't feel shame. Like I don't know what that's like. Having no concept of feeling less than. Imagine what no shame would be like. Just like what would that be like? And then if we remember Bob with his, last week with his like theater sermon, the serpent, right? The serpent tempts Eve. She ate the fruit, gave it to her husband who was with her. And so what did the serpent say? The serpent says, God's holding out on you, right? Basically, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but God says, the serpent says, God's holding out on you. God's holding out on you. He took God's words and he twisted them around. That's right. Okay, and he said, he says, you will not surely die. You will be like God, right? So the serpent says you will be like God. And Bob also pointed out last week that that's not what God said, right? So what did God say? The serpent saying, you will be like God, but God said, it is good, it is good, it is good, it is very good, right? And it also says that God created us in his image, right? And in his likeness. So we're already like God. It says he made them in his image and his likeness. So who can this serpent represent? So in this story, we're going back to this idea of the story. Naked on a chain, right? This serpent, who can this serpent represent? Who does this serpent represent in the story? Anybody know? What's that? The enemy. Okay, Satan. Okay. All right. How about the voice of the accuser? The voice that says that we're less than, whatever that voice is. Maybe, somebody that said you'll never amount to anything. Maybe a teacher, maybe a pastor, maybe a father, maybe some sort of leader, somebody that was over you at some point, or kind of took that position. Maybe that person that said, once an addict, always an addict. You guys ever hear that? Oh, once an addict, always. You're trying to do better. You're trying to better yourself. You're trying to do, and there's that voice that says you'll never amount to anything. That voice that says you're nothing but a fill in the blank. Right? Maybe it's the voice of an abusive ex-boyfriend, and you're trying to move on. Maybe a girlfriend. Maybe a husband, maybe a wife. And maybe it's not even what you've been, how you've been, what you've been called, or what, but it's the way you've been treated, right? So maybe it's that. I find it interesting. This is kind of a side note, but when we talk about guilt and shame, like guilt is something like 3 to 6 years. Shame is like within 12 months. like within 12 months of being born, we find shame. And it's because it really attacks who we are, right? The shame and guilt are different. Guilt, we start to think what's right, what's wrong, did I mess up? I have some sort of an idea, and we're starting to, turn on those parts of our brain that are that's thinking about things, right? But shame is much, much deeper. And it attacks who we are. It kind of gets into studies around like, contact with your baby, like, the connections between a mother and a father and their child. And so shame can get deep in there. And so it may be just neglect or, rejection or disrespect. Because shame is, I messed up. Guilt is, I messed up. Shame is, I messed up. So if we get back into the story, this is now in chapter 3, verse 1. And I'll paraphrase again. The serpent says, God knows that, if you eat of this tree, you will know all things. You'll know good and bad. It's like, so what can be wrong with that? Like, I'll know the good and I'll know the bad. And so, if we got good and we got bad, and now we have the knowledge of good and bad, and it can't be all bad, right? If we have good and bad, it can't be all bad. Anyway. But if all we have is good in the beginning, then what did we gain by eating the fruit? We gain bad. Harm. Yeah. Right. So God created good, right? God created good. And God created you, and God created me. And so God created us good. So like if you're like, you've never heard that before, like, it's like, wait, like that's, I've never heard that. Like I've heard about God, and I've never heard these kind of things. Like seriously, like God created you, and God says you're good. So question, shame, back to shame. Shame questions God, what God says. So now that you've heard what God says, for those of you that never heard that, shame will come in and try to question what God said, just like in the story, right? And shame also distorts the truth. Shame will point out that what you've done and say that makes you fill in the blank, right? Genesis 3:7 says, then their eyes both, then the eyes of both opened, and they knew they were naked. Right. So they take this knowledge of good and evil, and they're good, and now there's bad, and there's the differentiation of the two. Like there's comparison. Comparison is a big part of shame. Comparing ourselves to others, having this idea that there's something that will make me worthy of whatever life. Sometimes we don't even feel like worthy of life. I felt that way. Like straight up. And so now their eyes are open. It says that. It says, oh, your eyes will be open. The serpent says, oh, your eyes will be opened. And then it says, their eyes were open. And they knew they were naked. And so shame distorts the truth. Right? Okay. It says you will always, it says you will never. It uses these absolutes, where I will never, I'm always, or we say that to each other, like amount to whatever, or you you are always, or you will always be fill in the blank, right? And you'll never do what's right. It's because of who you are, right? That's what shame says. Shame says it's because of who you are, right? Divorce, right? It's because of who you are, right? So, if you go through that pain of a divorce, and it's like, it's because of who you are. It's your fault, right? That's what shame will say. Or maybe it's divorce like you're 5, your parents got a divorce, and it's like, oh, it's because of you, right? And so you live with this shame, and this voice, right? Yeah. Oh, what would you say? What do you think? Okay. Did you guys hear what he said? What he asked? Hey, he said, is that outer, like voices, or is that inner dialogue? What would you guys say? Yeah. Yeah, I would say it starts on the outside,
When it's inside, it's like you can fertilize it.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it comes from the outside first, and then like it goes, like you said, it goes.
Yeah.
Prepared enough time on the outside, then it's all of a sudden it sinks in.
Mhm. Yeah. This is a side note, and I hope that I'm able to, I don't want to, I'm going to share anyway. So there was a time not too long ago when I went on a trip, and I went on the trip because I was like at the end of myself, and I really just wanted to die. Honestly, I wanted to die. I didn't feel like I was worthy of life. And while I was on this trip, it was a dark night of my soul. Like I was just like, I don't know if I can get through this night. Like it was that bad. And I was in a place I was in Salem, Oregon, where I grew up, and I was there, and I was experiencing all over again all the shame and all this like mess, things that I had done that nobody knew about, all this stuff. The teachers that had said certain things about me, and I'm in these parking lots of these schools, and I'm like in my car, and I'm driving all around. Lisa's like checking me out on Find My iPhone, and I'm just driving around in circles, and I'll park for a while. And what I was doing, I was going to all these schools that I went to when I was growing up, had learning disabilities, and I'm remembering all this stuff that I went through and what the teacher said and how the students treated me, and then I'm going to these different places when I was older, and I'm like going to these like parties and these different, hotel parties and different things that happened in those places. And I'm like experiencing all this, like all over again, the shame. And I'm just like, these are things that I feel like God can't forgive me for, or, these things I've seen and I've experienced. And I'm just like, going to these different places. And then like, long story short, I mean, God really showed himself to me in a real tangible, like atmospheric way. And I just felt the love of God and the acceptance of God from the very beginning. Like there was no time when God wasn't there and didn't like not love me. You know what I'm saying? And this is why this reminded me of this, because something like kind of hit me, and it was like this idea that we're supposed to take every thought captive, right? That was what I was taught when I was growing up. And I thought about it, and I was like, well, what about those thoughts that I just have, Like, it's just the way I am. Like if I take every thought captive, like, what about those thoughts that I don't even know are thoughts because I don't know if it's true or not. Like, I feel like it's true because somebody said, but then there's this like conviction, or there's this thing that says, like, I don't like that. Like, I don't like that. And I don't want to believe that, and I, in that moment, I realized I don't have to believe that, And so I thought about it, and I'm just like, that's like, these thoughts are things that somebody has told us, like the teacher and the, my father and, different people like throughout my life. And this thing that I was experiencing in this place where I was driving to these different, and it was like all those things that made me who I think I am, right? And how I've acted and how I've acted out what I thought, I was. And, right? So, So it's like the deception, that distorted truth. Now I'm gonna try to get back to this. So what do they do? Okay, so they eat the fruit. They realize they're naked, and what do? They sow fig leaves, right? And they make clothes for themselves to hide their nakedness, right? And they hide from God, right? And so how does shame separate us from God? Okay, in our own minds. We try to hide from God, right? Shame causes us to hide. That's the other thing. Shame causes us to hide. And so how do we try to hide from God? We try to hide shame with perfection, performance, right? I've been there. I am there many times. We're critical of others. A lot of times we're critical of others because we're critical of ourselves, and people are critical of us because they're also critical of themselves. And hurt people, and shamed people also shame people. What's that? Self-justification. Okay, so shame hides from God. But God doesn't separate himself from us, right? In the story. That story is about me and you, right? And that accusation, that voice, that serpent, that voice in our head that says, we're not worthy. But God doesn't, he doesn't separate himself from us. What does God do in this story? He comes looking for us. And Manuel, remember you were up there, you were doing the God thing. And why did you say you came into the garden? Yeah. It's like I made these, I made these. They're my pride, my pride and joy, my these are my creations. And I want to come and I want to hang out with them, and I want to walk with them. Yeah.
Right? Like that's not the truth, but shame makes us think, oh, God doesn't want to be close to me. So, but it's so cool that God's like, who actually I'm coming looking for? Should they love you? Thinking
Yeah, totally. Did you guys all hear what she said?
Say it again.
She said it so well. Shame tricks you into believing that God doesn't want to be close to you. God doesn't want to be with you. Is that summed up what you said?
What you say, like it's fear based.
Yeah. Yeah, which is also one of those core issues when it comes to addiction as well. Right? Fear. Okay. Okay. So God comes into the garden. Adam and Eve are hiding, and God says, "Where are you?" Right? He's like I came to hang out with you, and you're just not there. Like this is always where you are. You're always right there. Like this is where, I created this, and where are you? You're hiding, right? And what does Adam say? Adam says, he says, I was naked, and so I hid myself, right? So before, naked, unashamed, and now I was naked, so I hid myself. I hid myself, right? We hide ourselves from God. And then what does God say? God says, who said you were naked? Did I say you were naked? Like, who said you were naked? Like this thing that you're ashamed of, and you're living in this shame. Like, did I say that? Like, right? Because shame it causes us to hide. It distorts the truth, and it also causes us to question what God said. And gives us the illusion, right, that God doesn't want to be, gives us this idea that God doesn't want to be with you. You can't draw near to God because God doesn't want you. Like, look at what you've done. Look at who you are, right? That's that accusation. That's that voice. So shame distorts truth. So here's the truth. Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, the life. A lot of these scriptures came from Bible study. God loved the world so much that he gave his only son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, right? Have everlasting life. And then it says, for did not come into the world to condemn the world, or send his son into the world to condemn the world, not to condemn the world. Right? Isn't that what I said? Okay. But that through him we may be saved. That's right. That's right. Yeah, I'm about to pass in the mic. All right. So shame causes us to hide. So here's what God invites us to. God invites us to live in the light as he is in the light. He invites us to confession, repentance, forgiveness. He calls us to experience community, right? That idea that, you know, you're not loved, nobody wants to be around you. Like he calls us into experience that community with God and with others, right? And so, you know, this idea, it says it right on the door. You guys see that when you guys came in? No judgment, right? There's no judgment inside of it. And that's what God calls us to. He calls us to stop judging others, right? Because this is the shame. There's that comparison. You know, we compare because, you know, if we can find those people that kind of look a little worse than us, or we can paint them in that way, then we don't feel so bad about ourselves in the moment. Right? We can make them feel this certain way, we don't feel so bad. And these are the ways that we contribute to this a lot of times, right? And if you like go back to the story, right, they start blaming each other, right? They start comparing, and then, you know, there's a whole lot more to the story, but I'm not going to get into that. So like I was taught that the big S sin word, you know, that separates us from God was sin, you know, but I think even if we get behind the thing that's behind the thing that's behind the thing that's behind the thing of our sin, right? The sin's not good, right? We don't want to live in that. But if we were to get behind all that, I think we'd find shame, right? And that's not our fault. I'm not saying that sin's not our fault. I'm saying that shame, that's not our fault. I'm going to do a little activation for you guys that are tracking with me and feel like there's something that God may be like calling you to, like say, you know, like that thing, like that's not what I say about you. Like you know, you're questioning something, or there's something that somebody said, or something that's like on you right now, you know what I mean? Like that you're just like, okay, that thing, you know, I've been using a lot of fill in the blanks and all this stuff because there's something, right? I know there's a lot that I could, you know, that I could get rid of right now, but, and so I want to do a little activation, got that. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a fire. No, seriously, we're going to, are there papers on you?
Right there, Bobby, on that stool.
Okay. Well, that wasn't good. All right. So I'm gonna pass these out. And if you guys have anything, that's, you know, that's something that's just come to mind, as I'm like, you know, been doing this, just write it on the paper. Nobody has to see it. And then, we're gonna toss it in this little trash can right here. There's an activation. This is, just going through a, just going through a little, you guys know what's going on. All right.
Here, I can help with that, or you can help with it. So we're gonna pass out a paper, and I would encourage you, if you want to, you don't have to, if you feel led, to write down something on you about something, or maybe there's something that you like, you try to move to a certain point in your life, there's something that comes up that holds you back. And so something that, you know, some something that you have shame, and the candle represents Jesus. And I would encourage you to, and the trash can is totally safe, to, you don't have to tell anybody what you write down, and you can light it on fire and drop it in the can, and nobody's gonna see it. And it's kind of symbolic of surrendering that thing that you think is keeping you from God to God, because God is right there with you. In your shame, in whatever you're walking through, God is with you. God is with you. So I'm gonna put a song on while we do this. And just in your time, come up and let your shame go to God. Let it go. We're physical people, so sometimes we need a physical act